Crimson dripped from the heavy gold in her hands, a crown she was never meant to claim. Once, they had sneered at her as a pathetic stain on the royal line, tossed aside by a king who valued power over loyalty. They forgot that betrayal has a way of forging monsters, and true vengeance always arrives with a devastating smile. Winter, in the year 1452, was recorded as one of the most brutal in the history of the northern reaches. The frost did not just kill the crops, it seeped into the hearts of men and wolves alike. Inside the great hall of Ashdown Keep, the cold was entirely man-made. Cora of House Hastings stood at the center of the obsidian floor, her simple grey woolen gown, a stark contrast to the velvet and gold worn by the courtiers surrounding her. She was 20 years old, and by all the laws of their kind, she should have shifted into her wolf form 2 years prior. She had not. To the Lycan nobility, a wolf who could not shift was a human, and a human was a liability. On the raised dais sat Caden, the Alpha King of the Ashdown territories. He was a terrifyingly handsome man, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes like chipped ice. For 3 years, they had been betrothed. For 3 years, Cora had loved him with the foolish, blinding devotion of a girl who believed that a mate bond could conquer politics. But the mate bond, the sacred tether that bound their souls, had not yet snapped fully into place, delayed by her dormant wolf. Beside Caden stood Lady Genia of the Carmichael estate, a woman whose family controlled the largest silver mines in the region. Genia was draped in crimson silk, her smug smile partially hidden behind a feathered fan. "Arthur Hastings is dead," Caden's voice echoed through the cavernous hall, silencing the murmurs of the court. "He died a traitor, squandering his wealth in the copper wars and leaving his daughter with nothing but a tarnished name." Cora kept her chin high, though her hands trembled. "My father was loyal to your father, King Caden. He bled for Ashdown. My blood is the same." "Your blood is stagnant, Cora," Caden replied, his tone devoid of any warmth. He stood up, slowly descending the steps of the dais. The heavy thud of his boots sounded like a death knell. He stopped mere inches from her. She could smell his scent pine and winter air, a scent that used to bring her comfort. Now it only brought nausea. "The Ashdown borders are failing," Caden announced to the room, though his eyes bore into hers. "The Iron Peak clan gathers in the east. I cannot lead our people into war with a cripple at my side. A queen must be a warrior. She must be a mother of strong pups. She must have the power to command." He gestured toward her. "Look at you. You possess no wolf. You have no dowry, no army, and no family." Cora felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. "We are mates by the goddess's decree, Caden. You feel the pull just as I do." "A pull I can sever," he whispered, so low only she could hear. Then, raising his voice for the court, he delivered the final blow. "She's useless. I, Caden of House Ashdown, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, formally reject Cora of House Hastings as my mate and my Luna. Furthermore, for the crimes of her father, she is stripped of her titles and banished from these lands. You have until nightfall to leave Oakhaven, Cora. If you are found within my borders by dawn, you will be hunted as a rogue." The collective gasp of the court was deafening, followed immediately by cruel, mocking laughter. Genia stepped down and wrapped a possessive arm around Caden's waist, resting her head on his shoulder. "You are making a terrible mistake," Cora said, her voice eerily calm despite the agonizing, tearing sensation erupting in her chest. The breaking of a mate bond was said to be worse than being burned alive. It felt as though an invisible hook had latched onto her soul and violently ripped it out. "The only mistake I made was indulging your presence for this long," Caden sneered. "Guards, escort her out." They did not let her pack. They did not let her take a coat. Cora was shoved out of the heavy iron gates of Ashdown Keep, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the excruciating burning void in her chest where her mate bond used to be. As the heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind her, Snow began to fall, burying the tracks of the life she was leaving behind. The Whispering Vales were a stretch of untamed wilderness that served as a buffer between the Ashdown territories and the domain of the Iron Peak clan. It was a place where rogues were slaughtered and where human merchants disappeared without a trace. For 3 days, Cora walked. The physical pain of the broken bond manifested as a raging fever. Her skin burned while the blizzard froze her extremities. She survived by eating packed snow and chewing on the bitter roots of winter thorn bushes. By the 4th night, her body began to fail. The historical records of the region would later note the sudden, anomalous drop in temperature during the week of the winter solstice, a cold so deep it cracked the stones of the mountains. Cora collapsed at the base of a massive ancient oak tree. The bark dug into her cheek. She was dying. She knew it. The rejection had severed her life force, and the cold was merely finishing the job. Weak, Caden's voice echoed in her fading mind. Useless. No, Cora croaked, the word barely a puff of white mist in the dark. A sudden, violent spasm racked her spine. It wasn't the shivering of hypothermia. It was a deep, structural agony. Bones cracked. Muscles tore and stitched themselves back together in the span of a heartbeat. What Caden and the rest of the Ashdown court did not know, what even Cora's father had kept hidden to protect her, was the true origin of her mother's bloodline. Her mother had not been a simple noblewoman. She was the last living descendant of the House of Valois, the original Lycan monarchs who ruled long before the treaties of the modern kings divided the lands. The Valois wolves did not shift at puberty. They shifted only when pushed to the absolute brink of death, a defense mechanism bred into them through centuries of assassination attempts. The pain of the broken bond had not killed her. It had served as the catalyst. A scream ripped from Cora's throat, turning into a deep, guttural howl that shook the snow from the branches above. Where a fragile, dying woman had laid, a massive wolf now stood. She was breathtaking. Her fur was the purest, blinding white, a color unseen in the region for 400 years. She was larger than any normal wolf, radiating a faint, ethereal silver aura. The fever was gone, replaced by a surge of intoxicating ancient power. She threw her head back and howled again, a sound of pure dominance that echoed across the vales. Less than an hour later, she was surrounded. 6 massive wolves, their fur varying shades of gray and black, stepped out of the tree line. They were border patrols of the Iron Peak clan. The largest of them, a scarred gray wolf, stepped forward, growling a warning. Cora did not submit. She did not bare her neck. Instincts older than the trees around them took over. She stood her ground, her amber eyes locking with the patrol leaders, projecting an aura of absolute authority. The gray wolf paused, confused, and then, incredibly, lowered his head in a sign of respect. They escorted her across the border, not as a prisoner, but as a dignitary. When she finally shifted back into her human form, she was provided with a heavy woolen cloak and brought to the fortress of Aerie, the seat of the Iron Peak clan. King Alistair was nothing like the monsters Caden's propaganda made him out to be. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark, unruly hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to analyze everything they touched. He sat casually on a heavy wooden chair in his study, a map of the territories spread out before him. My guards tell me a giant white wolf wandered out of the Whispering Vales, demanding no quarter and bowing to no one, Alistair said, his voice a rich baritone. He poured 2 goblets of spiced wine and handed one to Cora. I am Alistair, and you are trespassing. I am Cora, she said, taking the wine. Her voice was steady, her mind crystal clear. The awakening of her wolf had sharpened her senses and hardened her resolve. Formerly, of House Hastings. Formerly, the betrothed of King Caden of Ashdown. Alistair raised an eyebrow. Ah, the useless human girl I've heard so much about through my spies. Caden dumped you for the Carmichael silver. He did. So, Why shouldn't I kill you and send your head back to Caden in a box to send a message? Alistair asked, though there was no malice in his tone, only curiosity. Because sending my head would only prove you are the brute Caden claims you are, Cora replied, taking a sip of the wine. It burned delightfully down her throat. And because I know the structural weaknesses of the Oakhaven mountain pass, I know the exact deployment routes of Caden's winter guard. And I possess the Valois bloodline, which makes my claim to these lands older and stronger than any king currently sitting on a chair. Alistair stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Well, Cora of House Hastings, Alistair said, raising his goblet in a toast. It seems Caden is a much bigger fool than I gave him credit for. Tell me about this mountain pass. The alliance between Cora and Alistair was forged not in the heat of a mating frenzy, but in the cold, calculating light of shared ambition. For 6 months, Cora remained at Aerie. During that time, she did not just survive, she thrived. Alistair was a warrior king, brilliant on the battlefield but deeply frustrated by the intricate politics of the neighboring neutral territories. Cora, having spent her life quietly observing the cutthroat politics of the Ashdown court while being ignored by everyone, was a master of statecraft. She helped Alistair draft trade agreements with the southern human merchants, securing grain shipments that would save Iron Peak from the famine sweeping the continent. In return, Alistair helped her train. He taught her how to fight in her human form, how to wield a short sword, and how to harness the immense, terrifying strength of her white wolf. Their dynamic was electric. Late nights spent leaning over maps turned into lingering glances. The respect they held for each other's intellect slowly blossomed into a profound, undeniable attraction. Yet, neither acted on it. They both knew that to defeat Caden and secure their futures, they needed more than just a strong army. They needed undeniable political legitimacy. That legitimacy lay in the neighboring territory of Ethelgard. Ethelgard was a matriarchal society, wealthy and fiercely independent, but they had lacked a ruler for a decade since the death of their last queen. According to the ancient laws of Ethelgard, the throne could only be claimed by a female of royal blood who could survive the trial of the Silver Flame, a mystical, archaic ritual that tested the purity and strength of a Lycan's soul. Many had tried. All had burned. If we conquer Ethelgard by force, their people will rebel, and we will waste resources fighting a guerrilla war in the mountains, Cora explained one evening, tracing a route on the map with a charcoal pencil. But if I claim the throne legally, Iron Peak and Ethelgard can unite through an alliance. We would surround Ashdown on 3 sides. Alistair leaned over the table, his physical proximity sending a familiar shiver down Cora's spine. He smelled of rain and iron. The trial of the Silver Flame is a death sentence, Cora. I will not lose my best strategist, he paused, his eyes dropping to her lips before meeting her gaze again. I will not lose you to an ancient bonfire. I am a Valois, Cora said, stepping closer to him, refusing to back down. My ancestors built the flames of Ethelgard. It will not burn me. Alistair hesitated, then reached out, his rough fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. If you do this, you won't just be a refugee in my castle anymore. You will be a queen, my equal. I have always been your equal, Alistair, she murmured. It just took you a little while to realize it. 2 weeks later, Cora stood in the grand courtyard of Ethelgard, surrounded by thousands of skeptical onlookers and the territory's ruling council. In the center of the courtyard burned the Silver Flame, a massive column of white-hot magical fire that crackled with a terrifying intensity. She wore no armor, only a simple white tunic. As she approached the fire, the heat was blistering, singing the ends of her hair. The high priestess of Ethelgard struck a staff against the stone. Step forward, claimant. Let the goddess judge your worth. Cora did not hesitate. She walked directly into the inferno. The crowd gasped, waiting for the screams. But the screams never came. Instead, the silver flames seemed to part for her, wrapping around her limbs like a lover's embrace, rather than consuming her. The fire recognized the ancient magic in her blood. When she emerged on the other side, her clothes were untouched, but her eyes glowed with a blinding, ethereal silver light. The high priestess fell to her knees. The council followed. Within minutes, the entire courtyard was bowing to her. Cora was crowned Queen of Ethelgard the next day. Her first royal decree was to sign an unbreakable pact of alliance and marriage with King Alistair of Iron Peak. While Cora's star was rising, Caden's kingdom was crumbling into ash. The winter of 1453 dragged on, and the Carmichael silver that Caden had so desperately craved proved useless. You cannot eat silver. The crops failed entirely. When Caden demanded that the Carmichael family open their private grain reserves to feed the starving commoners, Genia's father refused, citing a loophole in their marriage contract. Genia herself proved to be a disaster as a Luna. Vain, petulant, and entirely disconnected from the struggles of the pack, she spent her days demanding new silks, while the pack members outside the castle gates rioted for bread. The military was equally crippled. Caden's winter guards were continually ambushed by Iron Peak forces who seemed to magically know all of Ashdown's secret routes and patrol schedules. Caden sat on his throne in Oakhaven, the heavy crown feeling like a vice around his skull. His borders were shrinking, his people were starving. His mate, the woman he had chosen for her supposed strength and wealth, was currently screaming at a servant over a spilled cup of tea in the next room. My king, his lead general, a grizzled man named Thorn, stepped into the hall and bowed low. Note, using Thorn as a noun, verb proxy. Wait, the prompt says don't use the name. Throne, I will change it. My king, his lead general, a grizzled man named Wyatt, stepped into the hall and bowed low. The riots in the lower district have been contained, but we have lost another 20 men to desertion. They are fleeing east. East? Caden growled, his eyes bloodshot. To Iron Peak? To that savage Alistair? No, sire, not Iron Peak. Southeast, to Ethelgard. Caden frowned. Ethelgard, they have been a leaderless rabble for a decade. Not anymore, sire, Wyatt said, his voice trembling slightly. Word has spread. A new queen has passed the trial of the Silver Flame. She has united Ethelgard and married King Alistair. They say she has brought spring to their lands, that her granaries are overflowing. Our people are going there to beg for food. Caden stood up, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. He had no choice. If Ethelgard had food and a new ruler, perhaps he could negotiate. Perhaps he could use his silver to buy their grain. He didn't know who this new queen was, but he knew how to charm women of power. Prepare my horse, Caden ordered, adjusting his cloak, and send a raven to the borders of Ethelgard. Tell this new queen that the Alpha King of Ashdown wishes an audience. We ride at dawn. He had no idea that he was riding straight into the jaws of the woman he had thrown away. Heavy hooves pounded against the cobblestone roads as Caden's envoy crossed the border into Ethelgard. What the Alpha King of Ashdown expected to find was a desolate, struggling territory recently stabilized by a lucky upstart. What he actually witnessed made his stomach twist into tight, envious knots. While Oakhaven was buried beneath feet of unyielding snow and his people gnawed on boiled leather to survive, Ethelgard felt like a different world entirely. The magical wards surrounding the region, fueled by the silver flame and the ancient power of their new monarch, kept the worst of the brutal winter at bay. Terraced farms were green with winter wheat, steam rose from public bathhouses, and the markets were bustling with merchants from the southern isles trading spices and silk for Ethelgard's famous ironwood. Fat, healthy livestock grazed in protected valleys. It was a picture of sickening prosperity. Caden rode at the head of a meager procession, flanked by General Wyatt and a dozen of his most loyal yet visibly malnourished guards. He had left Genia locked in her chambers back at Ashdown, keep screaming about the indignity of being left behind. Caden no longer cared about her temper tantrums. The Carmichael silver mines had flooded 2 months ago, rendering her family's wealth entirely useless. She was a political dead weight, and Caden's singular focus now was survival. "They have enchanted the very soil," Wyatt murmured, pulling his fur cloak tighter around his shoulders as they rode through the capital city's gates. "Look at the peasants, sire. They are wearing dyed wool. Even the commoners here are eating better than our nobility." "Do not act like a beggar, Wyatt," Caden snapped, though his own eyes darted hungrily toward a baker's cart, stacked high with fresh, crusty loaves of bread. "We are here to negotiate a trade alliance. The new queen needs military protection, something a matriarchal society lacks. I have seasoned warriors. She has food. It is a simple transaction." Caden truly believed his own arrogance. He adjusted his crown, sitting taller in his saddle as they approached the Sunspire Citadel, the ancestral seat of Ethelgard's rulers. Constructed of white marble and gleaming quartz, the citadel reflected the winter sun like a beacon. They were escorted into the great hall by guards wearing pristine silver armor. The architecture was awe-inspiring, boasting vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes of the goddess and the first lichen ancestors. At the far end of the hall, bathed in the natural light of a massive stained glass window, sat the twin thrones of Ethelgard. Caden stopped dead in his tracks. The woman seated on the queen's throne wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, embroidered with silver threads that formed the constellation of the winter wolf. A crown of intertwined white gold branches rested upon her dark hair. She was flanked by an honor guard and council members who looked at her with an adoration that bordered on worship. Beside her, on the king's throne, sat Alistair of Iron Peak, looking effortlessly dangerous in a dark leather tunic and a cloak of black wolf fur. But Caden's eyes were locked on the queen. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if the cold had caused him to hallucinate. The woman possessed an aura of such overwhelming power that it made the alpha wolf inside his chest whimper in submission. Her skin was radiant, her amber eyes burning with a cold, ancient fire. She was breathtakingly beautiful, regal, and entirely untouchable. "Cora," Caden whispered, the name slipping from his lips like a dying breath. "Welcome to Ethelgard, King Caden of Ashdown." Cora's voice rang out, clear and melodic, carrying effortlessly across the vast expanse of the hall. She did not rise to greet him. She merely looked down at him from her elevated dais, resting her chin on her hand in a gesture of bored amusement. "We received your raven. You mentioned a desire for an audience." Caden's mind fractured. The room began to spin. How was this possible? The fragile, useless girl he had banished to the frozen wastes of the Whispering Vales was supposed to be a pile of bones buried under the snow. She had no wolf. She had no power. Yet here she sat, radiating the distinct, terrifying energy of a lichen monarch of the highest order. "You," Caden stammered, stepping forward, abandoning all protocol. "You are dead. I cast you out. You are a human." Alistair let out a low, rumbling chuckle that echoed menacingly. "Careful, Caden. You are addressing the Queen of Ethelgard and the Luna of Iron Peak. Guard your tongue, or I will remove it from your mouth." Cora held up a hand, silencing Alistair with a gentle touch to his arm. The casual intimacy of the gesture sent a spike of white-hot jealousy through Caden's veins. "I am very much alive, Caden," Cora said smoothly. She leaned forward, the silver threads of her gown catching the light. "The harsh winters of the Whispering Vales did not kill me. In fact, they were quite illuminating. They burned away the weakness of House Hastings and awakened the blood of House Valois that ran through my mother's veins." A collective murmur rippled through Caden's guards. House Valois, the original kings, the legendary White Wolves. The revelation struck Caden with the physical force of a warhammer. He had not just cast aside a mate. He had thrown away the most potent royal bloodline on the continent, a bloodline that gave her an absolute divine right to rule every inch of land he currently claimed. "Valois," Caden breathed, his knees suddenly feeling weak. He looked at her closely, seeing the faint, ethereal silver aura that clung to her skin. The signs were all there. The history books he had ignored in his youth detailed the Valois awakening. This is a trick, a glamour." "Does this feel like a trick?" Cora asked. Her voice dropped an octave, and she unleashed a fraction of her alpha aura. The air in the room instantly grew heavy. The pressure was suffocating, primal, and absolute. Caden's guards dropped to their knees instantly, gasping for breath as their inner wolves submitted to the ancient bloodline. General Wyatt fell forward, his hands braced against the marble floor. Caden fought it, his own alpha pride warring against the crushing weight of her dominance. But a second later, his legs buckled, and he fell to one knee. Sweat beaded on Caden's forehead as he looked up at the woman he had humiliated. She sat comfortably, unaffected by the localized gravity she had just created. "Rise, King of Ashdown," Cora commanded, pulling her aura back into herself. The pressure vanished, leaving Caden gasping for air. "I do not demand submission from visiting diplomats. Unless, of course, you are no longer a diplomat but a supplicant." Caden staggered to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and furious desperation. He remembered his starving people. He remembered the empty treasuries and the failing borders. He had come here to negotiate from a position of strength, but he had none left. "Cora, Queen Cora," Caden began, forcing his voice to remain steady. I came to discuss a trade agreement. The winter has been exceptionally harsh in Oakhaven. Our crops have failed. I require grain from your storehouses. In exchange, Ashdown will provide military support and secure the northern mountain passes for Ethelgard. Cora exchanged an amused glance with Alistair. "Military support?" Alistair repeated, leaning forward. "Caden, you have lost a third of your standing army to desertion in the last 3 months. Most of them are currently working in our logging camps because they prefer swinging an axe for a hot meal over freezing to death for your pride. As for the northern mountain passes, my Iron Peak forces have already secured them. We took them quietly 3 weeks ago. Your border patrols didn't even notice." Caden's face drained of color. He looked back at Wyatt, who gave a slow, defeated nod. Ashdown was already surrounded. "You have nothing I need, Caden," Cora said, her tone devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. It was the tone of a monarch addressing a minor nuisance. "Your treasury is empty. Your Carmichael silver mines are flooded. Your people are starving, and your military is in shambles. Why should I give you the grain that my people worked so hard to harvest?" "Because we are mates," Caden blurted out, the words echoing desperately in the quiet hall. The moment he said it, he realized how pathetic it sounded, but he grasped at it like a drowning man holding onto a piece of driftwood. "The goddess bound us together, Cora. I was foolish. I was blinded by the pressures of my court and the threats on our borders. I made a terrible mistake, but the bond can be restored." He took another step forward, his eyes pleading. "Forgive me. Cast aside this brute from Iron Peak. Return to Ashdown with me. We can unite the 3 kingdoms. You will be my Luna, my equal. We can rule the entire northern reaches together, just as we planned when we were young." The great hall fell utterly silent. Even the crackling of the hearth fires seemed to mute in anticipation of her response. Cora stood up. She descended the steps of the dais slowly, the train of her gown whispering against the polished marble. She stopped mere inches from Caden, mirroring the exact position they had been in a year ago in the great hall of Ashdown. Only now, she was looking down at him. "When you drag me to the center of your court," Cora said, her voice a deadly quiet whisper, "when you stripped me of my family's name, when you called me a cripple and threw me out into a blizzard without a coat. Did you think of the goddess then?" Caden swallowed hard, unable to meet her piercing amber eyes. "You severed our bond, Caden," Cora continued, circling him slowly like a predator assessing a wounded stag. "You ripped it out of my chest because you wanted the Carmichael silver. You broke the most sacred law of our kind for greed. The pain nearly killed me, but it didn't. It forged me." She stopped in front of him again. "You ask for my grain. You ask for my forgiveness. You dare invoke a bond you shattered. You are not a king, Caden. You are a frightened boy wearing a crown too heavy for your head." Caden's pride snapped. "I am still the Alpha of Ashdown. I still command loyal men. If you refuse me, I will raid your borders. I will burn your crops." "With what army?" Alistair interjected, standing up from his throne. The Dark King walked down the steps and stopped beside Cora, slipping an arm around her waist. The protective, possessive gesture made Caden's blood boil. "Look at my neck, Caden, and look at hers." Caden looked. On the side of Alistair's neck, just above his collar, was the distinct, scarred mark of a mating bite. Caden's eyes darted to Cora. There, on her elegant neck, was a matching mark. It wasn't the tentative, unformed bond they had shared. It was complete, final, unbreakable. "You," Caden gasped, stumbling back a step. "You mated with him." "I found a true equal," Cora corrected. "A man who saw my worth when I was a refugee in a blizzard, not when I was wearing a crown. We are bound by soul, by blood, and by magic. Your pathetic attempt to invoke a dead history means nothing to me." Caden looked frantically around the room. He looked at the Ethelgard council members, who stared back with open disdain. He looked at his own general, Wyatt, who had lowered his eyes to the floor, refusing to meet Caden's gaze. He was utterly, entirely alone. The realization hit Caden with a crushing finality. There would be no negotiation. There would be no trickery or political maneuvering that could save him. He had gambled his kingdom on vanity and greed, and he had lost everything to the woman he deemed useless. "Please!" Caden's voice broke. The Alpha King, who had ruled the northern reaches with an iron fist, fell to both knees on the cold marble floor. The sound of his knees hitting the stone echoed like a gunshot in the silent hall. Tears of sheer desperation spilled over his eyelashes. "Please, Cora, I am begging you, let me freeze, punish me, but do not let the children of Oakhaven starve. Do not punish my people for the sins of their king. Have mercy." Cora stared down at the weeping man at her feet. For 3 years, she had loved him. For one agonizing night, she had hated him enough to want to tear his throat out with her teeth. But now, looking at the broken, weeping figure of Caden of Ashdown, she felt nothing but a cold, heavy pity. "A true king finally speaks," Cora noted softly. She turned and walked back up the steps of the dais, taking her seat on the throne of Ethelgard. She looked at General Wyatt. "General," Cora addressed him. Wyatt immediately dropped to one knee, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty," Wyatt replied respectfully. "How much food does Oakhaven need to survive the winter?" 5,000 bushels of grain, Your Grace, and dried meats, if they can be spared. The sickness is spreading fast in the lower wards due to malnutrition." Cora nodded, turning to a scribe standing near the thrones. "Draft an order. 10,000 bushels of grain, 2,000 pounds of dried venison, and 50 wagons of medicinal herbs are to be sent to Ashdown immediately, escorted by the Iron Peak Heavy Cavalry." Caden looked up, his tear-stained face registering absolute shock. You will save them?" "I will save them," Cora said coldly, her eyes locking onto his. "Because they are no longer your people, Caden. They are mine." Caden froze. "What?" "The Treaty of Surrender," Cora announced, her voice echoing with the absolute authority of the Valois bloodline. "You will abdicate the throne of Ashdown. You will sign over all territorial rights, titles, and lands to the united crown of Ethelgard and Iron Peak. Your military will be folded into our own. Ashdown will cease to exist as an independent kingdom, becoming a province of our empire." "You are annexing my kingdom," Caden whispered in horror. "I am conquering your kingdom without spilling a single drop of blood," Cora corrected. "You can sign the treaty, abdicate, and live out the rest of your days in a modest estate in the southern valleys, provided you never set foot in Oakhaven again. Or you can refuse, and I will let your people drag you from your palace and execute you in the streets for starving them. The choice is yours. But know this, Ethelgard grain does not feed Ashdown subjects. It feeds Ethelgard citizens." Caden looked at the faces of his own guards. Not a single one of them made a move to defend him. In their eyes, he saw the hunger, the exhaustion, and the bitter resentment of a disastrous reign. They wanted the food. They wanted the new queen. Slowly, heavily, Caden reached up and pulled the golden crown from his head. His hands shook as he placed it on the marble floor at the base of the dais. "I accept your terms," he said, his voice entirely devoid of life. "Ashdown is yours." "Take him to the guest quarters and draw up the parchment," Cora ordered her silver guards. "General Wyatt, you will ride back with our supply caravans at dawn to announce the annexation and feed the people." As Caden was escorted out of the Great Hall, a broken, defeated man stripped of his pride and his power, he looked back over his shoulder one last time. He saw Cora, radiating power and grace, a true Luna, a true queen, leaning into the protective embrace of King Alistair. It was a vision of everything he had ever wanted, everything he had possessed in the palm of his hand, and everything he had thrown away. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. That spring the snows melted to reveal a changed world. The borders of the northern reaches were erased, replaced by a massive united empire ruled from the Sunspire citadel. Genia Carmichael was quietly exiled to a distant convent after attempting to bribe an Iron Peak guard with worthless silver jewelry. Caden spent his remaining years in a small, drafty manor in the south, haunted by the howls of the giant white wolf that occasionally echoed from the northern mountains during the full moon. Queen Cora and King Alistair ruled for 60 years. They were known as the Silver Monarchs, bringing an era of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and magical resurgence to the Lycan world. Cora never forgot the cold of the Whispering Vales, and she ensured that no citizen in her vast empire ever went hungry or was cast aside for being deemed useless. For she knew better than anyone that sometimes the most magnificent crowns are forged not in gold, but in the fires of survival. Did this tale of vengeance and royal betrayal keep you on the edge of your seat? The ultimate underdog story proves that those they call weak often hold the most ancient power. If you loved witnessing Cora's rise from a discarded mate to an unstoppable queen, smash that like button. Share this video with fellow fantasy romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another epic werewolf drama. What would you do in Cora's shoes? Comment below.